no chemical analysis was done as the original protocol was supposed to require, but they ignored this. So all the scientists were a bit confused because that was the only piece of the puzzle that was not in agreement with the comprehensive analysis of the shroud. All the chemists and all the other analyses were given leading to the authenticity. Only this dating was out of place, let's say. So they hypothesized various hypotheses why this could have been happened. Maybe the labs, they didn't purify the sample before submitting to the instrument, and so on. Various hypotheses. But the breakthrough came in the year 2000, so over 10 years later, when this couple, Sue Benford and Joseph Marino, put forward a new hypothesis. The dating is medieval because the samples were not the pure cloth, but were decontaminated by mending or repairs of the 16th century. So they argue the dating represents an average of the date of the older material, the original material, and some modern material from the 16th century. And they advanced this hypothesis because basically they had a microphotograph of the Zurich sample, and they took it around 3 big labs, 3 experts or textile experts, showed to them without saying where it came from. And in all cases, they received the same answer. There is, on one part of the sample, there is spurious yarn. It's much thinner, different. Just looking at this expert were just identifying something strange in the sample. So they proposed this hypothesis in a conference of the Shroud in the USA, and immediately there was a big hoo-ha from Ray Rogers, the chemist, who did the analysis of the STERP, member of the STERP, of the leading of the chemist team, who first was convinced of the authenticity of the artifact, but then he sort of gave way to the news that this was a medieval after all. And so he said, oh, there are these 2 people, Sue and Joseph, are not scientists. They belong to the lunatic fringe, that's his exact words, and I will disprove them in 5 minutes. So the reason why he was able to say that is because he was the only man in the world to possess the thread from the sturp that was taken during the sturp 5 days, the thread taken from various parts of the main part of the shroud, and he had also, so he had samples taken from the main body of the shroud, and also he had some samples from the rice, from some thread from the rice sample. So his reasoning was that if I compare chemically the thread from the rice sample and the thread of the shroud, and I found that they are identical, they have identical chemical properties, then I can prove that this carbon sample, which was taken next to the rice, has got the same properties of the whole cloth. But to his surprise, the 5 minutes became 5 years because he found differences, chemical differences between the 2 threads. And also at some point he asked also for threads from the reserve part of the carbon 14 the carbon sample. And so he concluded that the radiocarbon date is not valid because the radiocarbon sample has completely different chemical properties than the main part of the cloth. And the radiocarbon sample is not part of the original cloth of the Shroud of Turin. Therefore, the radiocarbon date was not valid for determining the true age of the shroud. As I said, he not only conducted the chemical analysis, but also looked at the threads under the microscope, and he was able to see contamination from cotton fibers. And as he was a good scientist, so he sent all the materials to other scientists to confirm what his hypothesis was, with what he concluded. And so these are another scientist, John Brown, who has taken these beautiful microphotographs of the threads. And here you can see a cotton fiber which is sort of flat. It's not a round fiber, that was found intertwined, interwoven inside the linen fiber. And this is another cotton fiber that was found on the surface of the linen thread. And here you can see these little blobs, these incrustations, also in this scanning electronic microscope image. This is the lumen of the thread. It's amazing, this picture, showing this incrustation on the surface. This was identified as a gum or dye particle, ropia, that was found on the surface of many fibers, and it was used to sort of make this the color of the cotton more similar to the linen of the shroud. And then the other type of disproof came from the statistical analysis. In 2017, this researcher, independent researcher, Tristan Casablanca and co-workers obtained the raw data from the British Museum. Because, this, I didn't have time to explain, but it's the British Museum that got the samples and directed the whole event. And after 30 years, following a response to a legal request for the Freedom of Information Act, all the raw data were released to independent researchers. And what they found, and that's the publication 2019, that the three labs gave results too different, too inhomogeneous between each other. They were not consistent within the errors of each other. So there were serious incongruities, homogeneity is lacking. The three labs had also samples from the side of a mummy, from a sample from medieval times. Their results, the three labs, were very concordant to each other. In the case of the shroud, they were too different. And in fact, we see the big range of over 100 years from a small sample. And that's an indication because each lab had a fragment of the sample, probably with a different quantity of mending. And so the conclusion again was that it's not possible to affirm that the 1988 dating offers conclusive evidence that the calendar age is this. It's not representative of the whole cloth. And that's now a result accepted by scientists. Even the atheist Richard Dawkins admitted that this result is very controversial. So moving now to 2022, so a group of Italian scientists had this idea of determining the dating of the clothes with a different method, using X-ray scattering, wide-angle scattering. And this looks at the aging of the cellulose, the degradation of the cellulose over the years. That follows a sort of pattern that can dependent very much on the ambient characteristic, specifically temperature and humidity. So they could model from the data available this pattern of degradation of the cellulose. And they had a sample here, a bit of a small thread of linen from rice, linen. And as a control sample, they used a thread from linen taken from an artifact from the Masada siege. The Masada was the last stronghold of the Israel rebellion to the Romans. The story is again very interesting, but this sample, Masada sample, was dated according to historical records, 55-74 Anno Domino. So they knew this dating. So here is the green line is this control sample. It's important to look in this area, this peak, where the green line is the Masada sample, the yellow line is the Turin Shroud thread. They are very close together. So that's a result that suggests that the date of the shroud is compatible with the 2,000 years old relic. So in conclusion of this part, the shroud is linen fabric, not European provenance. The body image is a negative, it's got 3D properties, it's superficial, fading to zero when the contact is missing. It's the image of a body tortured and crucified, as we see. The wool stains are human blood, group AB positive, and they deeply penetrate into the fabric. As I said, nowadays we can conclude it's only pre-primate, and one should have the DNA. But there are absence, no pigments or dyes are present on the cloth. So examination of the fluorescence, infrared thermography exclude the painting. The ultraviolet fluorescence excludes caloric hypothesis. The pollen train is consistent with the historical journey that we historians hypothesize for the shroud. On the tapes also there have been found minerals, in particular this aragonite, which are typical of the soil of Jerusalem. The carbon dating is regarded as invalid or not representative of the shroud. A new dating method based on the degradation of the cellulose concord with the date of an ancient fabric of the time of Christ. And this, by the way, this method, this analysis has been reproduced also by other universities, Padua, Bologna, Modena, Udine, Parma, and even London. So they conclude, all agree with the dating of 50 Anno Domini plus minus 200 years. So in conclusion, all these multidisciplinary investigations, they corroborate the authenticity of the shroud. Now, before, because this may be tiring, before going to the next, part, I wanted to spend this few. Sorry, people, you.
Do you want me to put the light on?
No, not yet. So I spent few slides on this on the date of the Last Supper. Again, controversial, everything controversial with Jesus, and on the chronology of the Passion. bearing in mind that none of the Gospel provides an organic chronological reconstruction of the Passion, but only facts and notation, different separate facts that one must put together, and they integrate and complement each other. So, the first controversy. All the Gospels agree that Jesus died on a Friday, few hours before the Sabbath. All of them, the Synoptic and John. John specified was the parasheve of the Sabbath, so no doubts in that. And again, John specified that Jesus was dying on the cross while the Jews prepared to sacrifice the Paschal lamb, because he says explicitly it was the parasheve not of any Sabbath, but the parasheve of the Passover. But then when we got to the Synoptics, they all described Jesus' Last Supper taking place on the first day of the Unleavened Bread, that's the festival lasting 7 days, when it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb. So, which Passover did Jesus celebrate? There is this discordance, apparent discordance. And for this, to arrive to the answer, must take you to this beautiful place. I don't know if you have heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls of Qumran. These scrolls, manuscripts, were found in this case between the first 11 caves discovered between 1947 and 1956. And then later excavation, they brought back to the light this village, Qumran, in the northwest side of the Dead Sea. And the archaeologists, they think it was a village inhabited by these Essenes. This was a sect contemporary to the Pharisees sect or the Sadducees sect. It's very well documented by a Jewish historian, Giuseppe Flavio, I don't know, can't pronounce the name in Jewish, who talks of these three sects, all at the time of Jesus. And the Essenes, in particular, were they distanciated themselves from the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They regarded them as corrupted, corruption of the Moses religions, and they sort of lived in a different style of life. Their priests practiced celibacy, for example. Their way of life was different from the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they followed a solar calendar. And that's the important bit, because at the time of Jesus, there were two separate calendars at the same time. The calendar followed by the Sanhedrin, the official calendar, that was a lunar calendar based on the moon cycles, while the Essenes, they followed Moses' calendar based on solar. So this was the Jewish inherited from the enslavement in Egypt. The lunar was inherited by enslavement in Babylon much later. So the Essenes followed strictly the solar calendar. The start of the year for the Jews is the first of Nisan, the month of Nisan. So for the lunar calendar, it was the new moon, spring. Solar calendar, the equinox, the spring equinox. So sometimes the two could coincide, other times they were separate. The Passover, the major festivity for the Jews, the celebration of the Exodus from Egypt, it was on the 15th of Nisan. Now, for the Essenes, for the solar calendar, it was fixed to be on a Wednesday, because for the Essenes, the first month of the year, the first of the year must be a Wednesday. The Genesis, when God separates day and light. The first day of all historic humanity is the fourth day of creation, our Wednesday. So the Passover for the Essenes was always following on the Wednesday, our Wednesday, the fourth day of the week. For the lunar calendar, it was a movable feast. And that year, John said it was on the Sabbath. And John, in fact, says the Sabbath was a high day, because when the Sabbath and the Passover coincided, it was an extra special feast, extra sacred feast. And looking at the 2 years proposed for the death of Jesus, either year 30 or year 33, there is again discordance between the scholars. On both years, the difference between the new moon and the spring equinox was 3 days. So in accordance, the astronomy coincidence occur every 30 years, but in both years, the difference was 3 days between the Wednesday and the Sabbath, the Passover Sabbath. So going back to what the passion of Jesus, the crucifixion happened not on the Sabbath, but on the Parasheva, on the preparation day. And here the Gospels are all agree, as I said, that Jesus died on Friday. John clearly says it was the Parasheva of the Passover, it was the Parasheva of the Sabbath. And in the Synoptic we have a similar hints of this, because Mark, for example, tells us that Giuseppe Arimathea, after asking boldly the body of Jesus to Pilate, went to buy the shroud. So the shops were open. It was not a festive day. It was the Parasheva. And also we know that that Sabbath was the Sabbath of the Passover. It was a high day. And also John described it as as a Passover of the Jews. Okay, so for that Friday was not the Passover, but rather the Vigil. And so, again, which Passover did Jesus celebrate? So there are two possibilities. One possibility that Jesus anticipated the Passover by 1 day, celebrating on a Thursday evening, like we do in our liturgy. But this was in fact a Sadducee custom. In order to avoid any work on the Sabbath, when the Passover happened to coincide with the Sabbath, they anticipated on 1 day to avoid the slaughter, the work of the slaughter of the Paschal Lamb at sunset. But this is a sort of contradiction with the Gospel, because we know the Sanhedrin leaders, they didn't the Passover yet. They want to enter into Pilate Praetorium, not to contaminate themselves. And the other possibility is that Jesus celebrated the Passover 3 days earlier, according to the Essenes calendar. And this would follow on the Wednesday. Now, for the Jews, the day starts at sunset. So for us, the sacrificial lamb slaughter on the Wednesday really starts the festivity, the celebration starts on our Tuesday evening. So that's another complication to wrestle with. So if we accept this hypothesis, with the scholars, they find it very plausible. If you remember the detail, sorry I'm going too far with this, but it's so beautiful, that when Jesus asked the two disciples to go and prepare for the Passover, send them in advance to Jerusalem, and the disciple asked the question, where do you want us to go to make preparations? And Jesus answered, go into the city and you will meet a man carrying a pitcher of water. Now, men, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, they did not carry water. There was a job of women, but it's different for the Essenes community. That's another little detail. So if we put Jesus Passover 3 days earlier on our Tuesday night, what happened to the chronology? We have the so-called long chronology, and I try to put it here. It's quite complicated, but I try to put it here. So here at sunset, on the third day of the week, Jesus celebrates the Last Supper according to the Essenes custom. Then we have the fourth day, the night between Tuesday and Wednesday, where Jesus goes into the Gethsemane garden, the agony, then the Judas betrayal, the arrest is brought to the house of Caiaphas' place, and then we have the first nocturnal interrogation, fruitless, by Annas. We have Peter's denial, and John says, most of the details come from the synoptics, but John says it was night. He specifies night. And then from Luke, Matthew, Mark, in the morning, they say, the Sanhedrin was gathered together. And then we have the first session of the trial. The Mishnah, the codification of the Torah Jewish law, was saying specifically that the trials were not to be held at night. It was to be held during the day. So the first hour of the day, Jesus is trialed by Caiaphas. And in front of the whole Sanhedrin. So the whole Sanhedrin didn't gather together, not during the night, but